In the harsh desert of New Mexico, a pregnant widow makes a promise that will test everything she believes about love and loss. Lucy Barrow stands at her husband's graveside, 6 months with child, swearing to the preacher she'll never marry again. Some promises are meant to be kept. Others are meant to be broken by the right person at the right time. When a stranger's horse throws him near her property line, Lucy faces a choice that goes deeper than simple kindness. Sam Colter is everything she swore to avoid: a drifter, a cowboy, a man whose presence awakens feelings she buried with her husband. As monsoon storms approach and her baby's arrival draws near, Lucy discovers that some vows made in grief don't account for the healing power of unexpected love. But when a woman has already lost one husband, can she risk opening her heart to lose another? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scrubland as Lucy Barrow stepped from her half-finished adobe cottage, one hand pressed against the small of her aching back. 6 months pregnant and stubborn as the mesquite that dotted her 40-acre claim, she surveyed the work that stretched before her like an insurmountable mountain. The walls of what was meant to be her and Jonah's dream home rose only waist-high on 3 sides, the fourth nothing but a gaping opening that would need framing before the monsoon rains arrived. Jonah had been so proud of this place when they'd filed their claim 2 years ago. He'd stand right where she stood now, his weathered hands gesturing toward the horizon as he painted pictures with words of cattle grazing in the distance, children running through the finished rooms, maybe even a proper garden where vegetables could grow despite the stubborn desert soil. His voice would rise with excitement as he described the day they'd hang their wedding quilt in the bedroom window, finally calling this patch of New Mexico earth their true home. Now the wedding quilt remained folded in the trunk beside her narrow cot, and Jonah lay beneath 6 feet of hard-packed earth in the churchyard, 12 miles east. The consumption had taken him so quickly that spring 3 weeks from the first bloody cough to the final rattling breath that left Lucy a widow at 48, carrying the child they'd prayed for through 10 years of marriage. The adobe bricks they'd made together still sat in neat rows near the foundation, some already showing cracks from the relentless sun. Lucy had learned to mix the mud and straw herself, her hands growing skilled at shaping each brick with the wooden forms Jonah had crafted. But laying them properly, ensuring the walls would hold against wind and weather, that knowledge had died with her husband, buried alongside his calloused palms and gentle laugh. She moved slowly to where their tools lay scattered. Jonah's hammer with its worn handle, the level that had belonged to his father, the trowel she'd watched him use to spread mortar with the precision of an artist. Each morning she picked up these instruments of creation and willed herself to continue what they'd started. Each evening she set them down again, frustrated by her inexperience and the growing heaviness of her belly. The nearest neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, lived 8 miles south with her bachelor son. Kind enough folks, but they had their own struggles with drought and debt. The town of Esperanza, where Preacher Williams had blessed her vow of eternal fidelity to Jonah's memory, sat a half-day's ride away. Close enough for supplies, when absolutely necessary, far enough that help wouldn't come quickly if trouble arose. And trouble was coming. Lucy could feel it in the oppressive heat that shimmered off the desert floor, see it in the towering clouds that built each afternoon along the distant mountains. The monsoon season would arrive within weeks, bringing floods that could wash away a lifetime's work in a single night. After that, her baby would come, assuming she survived the birth without a midwife or doctor within reach. Some might call her foolish for staying, for trying to complete this impossible task alone. The banker in Esperanza had made it clear he'd happily foreclose on the claim, sell the land to someone with the means to develop it properly. Her sister in Kansas had written twice, begging Lucy to come stay with her family until the baby arrived. Even Preacher Williams, after accepting her solemn vow at Jonah's graveside, had suggested she might reconsider her determination to remain isolated. But this was where she belonged. This was where she'd loved Jonah, where they'd planted their hopes like seeds in resistant soil. The child growing beneath her heart had been conceived in their first shelter canvas tent that leaked rain and offered little protection from the wind. Every brick in those neat rows had been shaped by their 4 hands working together. Every dream embedded in the foundation stones had been dreamed by them both. The baby stirred as if responding to her thoughts, a gentle flutter that made Lucy smile despite her circumstances. Boy or girl, this child would know the father who'd wanted them so desperately, would hear stories of the man who'd sung lullabies to Lucy's belly each night before sleep took him. The cottage would be finished, somehow. Their dream would survive, even if Jonah couldn't. Lucy walked the perimeter of the foundation, her fingers trailing along the rough-hewn stones Jonah had laid with such care. Here would be the kitchen, with windows facing east to catch the morning light. There would be the main room, large enough for a proper table where they'd share meals and the child would learn letters. The bedroom faced south, positioned to stay warm during the brief but bitter winter months. She paused at what would become the front door, imagining the heavy wooden portal Jonah had planned to craft from timber they'd hauled from the mountains. He'd wanted to carve their initials into the lintel JB and LB, joined together beneath the date of their arrival. Such a simple thing, yet it had represented everything they were building together. The sun climbed higher, and Lucy felt the familiar fatigue that came with carrying new life. Her body demanded rest, but rest meant time lost, and time was the one resource she couldn't afford to waste. The adobe bricks wouldn't lay themselves, and each day brought her closer to the moment when she'd be unable to work at all. She selected Jonah's hammer from the scattered tools, testing its weight in her grip, heavier than it looked, balanced for a man's strength rather than her own. But it was what she had, and it would have to be enough. Everything would have to be enough. Her determination, her love for Jonah's memory, her fierce desire to give their child the home they'd planned together. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful in its harsh indifference. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals that spoke of heat and distance. Somewhere in the vastness, cattle ranchers moved their herds toward better grazing. Somewhere, travelers followed ancient trails toward destinations that mattered to them alone. And here, in this small corner of an enormous territory, a pregnant widow prepared to battle time, weather, and her own limitations, to complete a dream that had become both blessing and burden. Lucy pressed her free hand to her belly, feeling the child's movement like a promise of tomorrows yet to come. She thought of Jonah's voice whispering endearments in the darkness, of his hands guiding hers as they mixed their first batch of adobe mud, of the way his eyes had lit up when they'd finally confirmed what they'd both suspected, that their prayers for a child had been answered. "I'll finish it," she whispered to the empty air, her voice carrying across the scrubland like a vow. "Whatever it takes, I'll finish what we started." The words seemed to hang in the stillness before the desert wind caught them, carrying them toward the mountains where storm clouds were already beginning their slow, inevitable build. Lucy Barrow, widow and soon-to-be mother, tightened her grip on her dead husband's hammer and prepared to face another day of impossible work, sustained by love, memory, and the stubborn belief that some promises were worth keeping no matter the cost. The horse appeared first as a dark speck against the amber horizon, growing larger as it approached Lucy's property line at a pace that spoke of urgency rather than leisure travel. She straightened from her work, laying adobe bricks, one hand shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Riders were rare on this stretch of desert. Most travelers kept to the established trails that ran north toward Santa Fe or south toward the railroad towns. As the horse drew closer, Lucy could see it carried a rider, though something seemed wrong with the way man and animal moved together. The horse's gait was uneven, favoring its left foreleg, and the rider swayed in the saddle like someone fighting to maintain his seat. She stepped away from her work, wiping adobe mud from her hands with a rag that had seen too much use. The horse stumbled just as it reached her fence line, a crude barrier of mesquite posts and barbed wire that marked the boundary of her claim. The rider pitched forward, his weight carrying him over the animal's neck in a graceless tumble that ended with a sickening thud against the hard-packed earth. Lucy's first instinct was to run toward the fallen man, but pregnancy had taught her the wisdom of caution. She approached slowly, calling out as she walked. "Mister, can you hear me?" The horse stood nearby, sides heaving, reins trailing in the dust. No response came from the still figure sprawled near her fence. When she reached him, Lucy could see he was a man of perhaps 50 years, his hair more silver than brown beneath a hat that had seen better decades. His clothes marked him as someone who lived much of his life, outdoors leather chaps, scarred by thorns, a cotton shirt faded to the color of desert sand, boots that had walked countless miles. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead where he'd struck the ground. "Mister?" She knelt beside him, her movements awkward with the baby's weight. His breathing was steady, which relieved her most pressing fear. But when she gently examined his left arm, she found it bent at an angle that nature never intended. Broken, certainly, and possibly other injuries she couldn't see. The man's eyes fluttered open as she touched his shoulder, revealing irises the color of winter sky. He tried to sit up, groaned, and fell back against the earth. "Easy," Lucy said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to caring for others. "You've taken a hard fall. Don't try to move just yet." "Horse through me," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Stepped in a prairie dog hole." He attempted to rise again, this time managing to prop himself on his right elbow before the pain in his left arm made him gasp. "Name's Sam Colter. I don't mean to impose on your hospitality, ma'am." "Lucy Barrow," she replied, studying his face for signs of serious head injury. His pupils looked normal, though a goose egg was already forming above his left temple. "That arm's broken, Mr. Colter. You're not going anywhere until it's properly set." Sam looked around, taking in the half-finished adobe walls, the scattered tools, the obvious signs of a construction project undertaken by insufficient hands. His gaze lingered on Lucy's rounded belly before returning to her face with something like embarrassment. "I can't trouble a lady in your condition. If you could just help me back on my horse." "Your horse is lame," Lucy interrupted. "Look at how he's standing." Indeed, the animal kept most of its weight off the injured leg, a sure sign of trouble. "And you've got a broken arm and possible concussion. The nearest doctor is in Esperanza, 12 miles from here. You wouldn't make it halfway." The truth of her words settled over them both like dust after a windstorm. Sam closed his eyes, and Lucy could see him calculating distances, options, the uncomfortable reality of his situation. When he opened them again, resignation had replaced the stubborn independence she'd recognized in his initial protests. "I don't have much choice, do I?" he said, managing a rueful smile that transformed his weathered features. "But I won't be a burden longer than necessary. Soon as this arm heals enough to ride, I'll be on my way." Lucy studied him for a long moment. Everything about Samuel Colter proclaimed him adrifteth well-traveled gear. The solitary bearing, the way his eyes seemed to catalogue escape routes, even while flat on his back. Exactly the sort of man she'd sworn to avoid, the kind whose presence might awaken feelings better left buried with Jonah. But Christian charity demanded she help, and practical necessity suggested that a man's labor, even one-handed, might advance her building project in ways that mattered. The approaching storm season left no room for false pride or excessive caution. "There's shelter in what passes for my cabin," she said, making the decision that would change both their lives. "It's not much, 3 walls and a canvas roof, but it's dry, and there's a place to sleep. I've got supplies for setting that arm, though I warn you it's going to hurt." "Pain's nothing new," Sam replied, accepting her help to sit up fully. "But I insist on making myself useful while I'm here. One good arm can still accomplish plenty, and I've built my share of structures over the years." As Lucy helped him to his feet, she noticed the silver spurs on his boots' well-crafted pieces, now bent and damaged from his fall. Something about the way he favored his injured side reminded her of Jonah during his final illness, the way pride struggled against physical limitation until acceptance finally won. "We'll see about making you useful after we tend that arm," she said, guiding him toward the cabin. "Right now you need to sit still and let me work." Sam nodded, though she could see it cost him to accept help from a woman clearly facing her own challenges. As they walked slowly toward her shelter, Lucy found herself wondering what circumstances had brought a lone rider to her remote corner of the territory. Cattle scouts sometimes passed through, checking on distant herds or seeking new grazing areas. Occasionally, men running from something the law, creditors, or their own past chose the isolation of the desert over the complications of civilization. Whatever had brought Samuel Colter to her property line, his presence represented both opportunity and danger. An extra pair of hands, even with one arm broken, could make the difference between completing her cottage before the storms arrived and watching her dreams wash away in the first flood. But a man who lived by movement and distance was exactly what she'd promised. Preacher Williams she'd never allow into her heart again. The broken spurs caught the last rays of sunlight as they walked, metal fragments that had once helped guide his journey, now serving as reminders that some interruptions, however unwelcome, arrived with purposes larger than accident or coincidence. Lucy pushed such thoughts aside, focusing instead on the immediate needs of treating injuries and providing shelter. But as she helped Sam Colter through the opening that would someday frame her front door, she couldn't shake the feeling that this stranger's fall had set in motion events that would test every promise she'd made at Jonah's graveside, forcing her to choose between the safety of solitude and the dangerous possibility that hearts, like broken bones, sometimes healed stronger than before. 3 days into Sam Colter's unexpected residency, Lucy had established a routine that maintained proper distance while acknowledging the practical benefits of his presence. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast over the small fire ring outside the cabin, served him his portion with polite efficiency, then retreated to her own work while he managed what construction tasks his condition allowed. The sight of Jonah's hammer in Sam's right hand had initially sent a stab of something between grief and territorial anger through Lucy's chest. But watching him adapt to one-handed work, testing each grip and motion with the careful precision of experience, she found herself grudgingly impressed. He'd split kindling for the fire, reinforced loose fence posts, and even managed to lay 6 adobe bricks using a technique that involved bracing the trowel against his knee. "You've done this before," Lucy observed, settling beside the wall where Sam worked. Her morning sickness had passed, but the baby's increasing weight made prolonged standing uncomfortable. "Built my share of line shacks and temporary shelters," Sam replied, carefully spreading mortar with movements that compensated for his immobilized left arm. "When you spend months at a time checking cattle in remote country, you learn to make do with whatever materials present themselves." He demonstrated his adapted technique, using the hammer's claw end to pull each brick into perfect alignment. The motion looked awkward but proved effective, and Lucy found herself studying his methods with the attention of someone whose survival depended on acquiring new skills. "Jonah always said the secret was keeping the courses level," she said, then immediately regretted mentioning her husband's name. Such references created an intimacy she wasn't prepared to acknowledge. But Sam simply nodded, testing the level against his work. Smart man, foundation problems compound with every layer. Better to go slow and get it right than rush and watch everything crumble later. The philosophical implications of his words weren't lost on Lucy, though she chose not to explore them. Instead, she focused on the practical aspects of construction, asking questions about mortar consistency and brick placement that gradually became a teaching session, extending well past the noon meal. "Your husband planned this well," Sam said during a break, studying the foundation layout with appreciation. "Good drainage around the perimeter, walls positioned to catch winter sun and shed summer heat. This'll be a comfortable home when it's finished." Lucy felt the familiar tightness in her throat that accompanied any discussion of Jonah's plans. He researched everything. Read books about desert building techniques, talk to anyone who'd built successfully in this climate. He wanted to get it right the first time. "Shows in every detail," Sam agreed. "These corner joints are textbook perfect. And using local materials saves both money and transport headaches." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. He'd be proud of how you're continuing his work. The simple statement hit Lucy with unexpected force. In the months since Jonah's death, she'd heard countless expressions of sympathy, offers of help, and suggestions about alternative courses of action. But no one had simply acknowledged that her efforts to complete their shared dream represented a form of honor to his memory. "I promised him," she said quietly. "The last night, when we both knew, he made me promise to finish the house. Said our child deserved to grow up in the home we'd planned together." Sam's expression grew thoughtful as he studied her face. Heavy burden for one person to carry, especially, he gestured toward her pregnancy with careful delicacy. "Especially for a woman in my condition," Lucy finished. "Everyone's been very careful to point that out." "I was going to say especially without proper help," Sam corrected. "But I suppose it amounts to the same thing. How long until the baby comes?" Lucy calculated quickly. 3 months, maybe less. And the monsoon season starts in 6 weeks. She'd been carrying these numbers in her head like a countdown toward disaster, but speaking them aloud made the timeline feel even more impossible. "That's cutting it close," Sam admitted. "But not impossible if the work goes efficiently." He studied the remaining construction with the analytical gaze of someone accustomed to solving logistical problems. "How many more courses to reach full wall height?" Jonah figured 22 courses total. "We've got 8 done." Lucy had counted them so many times the numbers were burned into her memory. Sam calculated silently, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the mathematics. 14 more courses, figuring an average of 40 bricks per course, call it 600 bricks, still to lay. At your current pace of maybe 10 bricks per day, working alone, you're looking at 60 days minimum. Add time for roof work, door and window installation, interior finishing. "It's impossible," Lucy said, finishing his analysis. "I knew that before you arrived. I just couldn't face the alternative." "Not impossible," Sam corrected. "Just requires more hands and better organization. 2 people working together can accomplish more than twice what one manages alone." He met her eyes directly. "That broken arm won't stay broken forever. Another week and I should be able to manage heavier work." Lucy felt a flutter of hope, followed immediately by suspicion. "You said you'd be moving on as soon as you could ride." "I did say that," Sam acknowledged. "But circumstances change. Your horse threw a shoe yesterday, did you notice? And my mount needs time for that leg to heal properly. Seems we're both temporarily grounded whether we like it or not." The practical truth of his observation warred with Lucy's determination to maintain emotional distance. Every additional day of Sam's presence made her more aware of how much easier daily tasks became, with masculine strength to share the load. More dangerous, she'd begun looking forward to their evening conversations, the way his quiet observations and dry humor provided companionship she hadn't realized she'd been missing. "I couldn't pay you," she said, testing whether his offer contained expectations she couldn't meet. "Never asked for payment. Just offering to help a neighbor finish what her husband started." Sam's tone remained carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested motivations more complex than simple charity. Lucy studied his weathered features, trying to read the intentions behind his offer. Samuel Colter remained largely mysterious. She knew he scouted cattle for various ranchers, that he'd never married, that he possessed construction skills and a gentleness with animals that spoke of natural kindness. But his reasons for traveling alone, for accepting what amounted to indefinite delay in his plans, remained unclear. "Why?" she asked directly. "Why would a man who lives by movement and distance choose to stay in one place helping a stranger?" Sam was quiet for so long Lucy thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of careful consideration. "Maybe because some strangers stop being strangers once you've shared their troubles. Maybe because finishing something good matters more than maintaining a schedule. Or maybe because a man gets tired of always moving on before anything meaningful can take root." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was quite ready to cross. Lucy felt her heart respond to the loneliness in his words, recognizing an echo of her own isolation. But accepting his help meant accepting his continued presence, and his continued presence meant daily testing of the vow she'd made at Jonah's graveside. 3 months, she said finally. If you're truly willing to stay, I accept your help until the baby comes or the house is finished, whichever happens first. But I want it understood that this is a practical arrangement, nothing more. Sam nodded solemnly, though she caught the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Understood, Mrs. Barrow. Strictly business. As if to seal their agreement, he turned back to the wall and placed another brick with the steady precision that was becoming familiar. The sight of Jonah's hammer in his competent grip no longer felt like trespass, but rather like the proper tool being used for its intended purpose by someone who understood its value. By the end of Sam's first week at the claim, Lucy had grown accustomed to the sound of quiet activity beginning before she woke each morning. When she emerged from her sleeping area behind the canvas partition, she'd find the fire already crackling, coffee water heating, and Sam working on some small project that didn't require the noise of hammer against nail. This particular morning, she found him seated on a wooden crate, his good hand moving a small carving knife through a piece of cottonwood with patient precision. Wood shavings curled around his boots like pale flowers, and the emerging shape in his palm looked distinctly like the beginning of something meant for small hands. "What are you making?" Lucy asked, settling carefully onto another crate with the cup of coffee he'd poured for her. "Rattle for the baby," Sam replied without looking up from his work. "Figured every child should have something made especially for them." He held up the partially carved piece, revealing the hollow sphere beginning to take shape. "My father made one for each of his children. I still remember the sound mine made, kind of a soft whisper when you shook it gentle, louder when you needed to get someone's attention." Lucy studied the emerging toy, noting the careful attention Sam was paying to smoothing every surface. "How many children in your family?" "7 of us. I was number 4. Sam's knife paused in its work. "Big family for ranch country, but my parents believed children were blessings, not burdens. My mother used to say each baby brought its own provisions from heaven." "Did they bring their own provisions?" Lucy asked, thinking of her own fears about providing for a child alone. Sam smiled, returning to his carving. "Somehow we always had enough. More love than money, but enough of everything that mattered. My father worked cattle for other men most of his life, but he made sure each of us knew we were wanted and valuable." "What happened to them? Your family?" "Parents passed some years back, within 6 months of each other. The way long-married couples sometimes do and can't bear to stay long without the other." Sam's voice carried wistfulness without bitter edges. "My brothers and sisters scattered to their own lives. We stay in touch when mail routes allow, but distance makes regular contact difficult." Lucy found herself picturing Sam as part of a large, noisy household, trying to reconcile that image with the solitary man who'd arrived at her property line. "You never wanted that for yourself? Wife, children, a permanent place?" The question seemed to surprise him into stillness. He looked up from his carving, meeting her eyes with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Wanted it," he said quietly, "just never found the right circumstances, or maybe never stayed in one place long enough for the right circumstances to find me." Something in his tone suggested a story more complex than simple wanderlust. But Lucy didn't press for details. They'd established a relationship based on shared work and mutual respect, but that didn't grant her access to his private disappointments. "The rattle's beautiful," she said instead, admiring the smooth curves taking shape under his skilled hands. "The baby will treasure it." "Hope so. A child should have things made with love, not just bought for convenience." Sam returned to his work, adding tiny decorative notches around what would become the handle. "Your husband planned to make toys and such?" Lucy felt the familiar pang that accompanied any reminder of Jonah's absence from their child's future. "He carved a cradle," she said. "Worked on it every evening after supper, sanding each piece until it felt like silk. He'd hold up spindles and ask my opinion about the spacing, whether the rockers were the right curve." She touched her belly gently. "The cradle's finished, waiting in the back of the cabin. But there should have been so much more. A hobby horse, building blocks, maybe a dollhouse if it's a girl. There still can be. Sam said matter-of-factly, babies don't require everything at once. They grow into toys gradually, and there's satisfaction in making things as they're needed. The casual assumption that he might be present for such future projects sent an unexpected warmth through Lucy's chest, followed immediately by the chill of reality. Sam Colter was a drifter whose temporary presence was dictated by circumstance, not choice. Allowing herself to imagine him as a permanent part of her child's life was a dangerous fantasy. "You're very kind," she said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose on your generosity indefinitely." Sam looked at her with an expression that might have been amusement. "Mrs. Barrow, if you haven't noticed, I'm the one imposing here. You've fed me, sheltered me, and allowed me to repay your kindness with whatever small help I can provide. If anything, I'm in your debt. You've worked hard despite your injury, the walls progressing faster than I could have managed alone." "Two people working together," Sam agreed, "makes a difference in more ways than just productivity." The truth of that observation had become increasingly apparent to Lucy over the past week. Not just the physical reality of shared labor, but the psychological comfort of having another adult present to discuss problems, share decisions, and provide the simple companionship that made isolation bearable. She'd grown accustomed to Sam's presence during evening meals, the way he listened to her concerns about the approaching storm season and offered practical suggestions based on his years of frontier experience. She looked forward to their conversations about construction techniques, cattle management, and the small details of daily survival that occupied most settlers' thoughts. More troubling, she'd begun to notice things that had nothing to do with practical assistance, the way Sam's eyes crinkled when he found something genuinely amusing, the gentle patience he showed when explaining techniques she didn't immediately understand, the careful respect he maintained even while sharing the intimate space of her temporary shelter. "The neighbors are talking," she said, giving voice to a concern that had been growing with each passing day. Sam's knife stilled against the wood. "About my being here? Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing smoke from two fires when she rode past yesterday. Asked if I had company." Lucy twisted her wedding ring, a gesture that had become habitual when discussing anything that might compromise her reputation. People notice things, even in country this empty. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you'd been injured and I was providing temporary shelter until you could travel safely." Lucy met his eyes directly. "But truth doesn't always matter when people are determined to think the worst." Sam was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. "Would it help if I moved my sleeping area outside? Make it clear I'm camping on your property rather than sharing your cabin." The offer touched Lucy with its thoughtfulness, even as it highlighted the precarious nature of their arrangement. A single woman providing shelter to an injured stranger was acceptable Christian charity. That same woman allowing a healthy man to remain indefinitely crossed lines that frontier society took seriously. "The weather's still too unpredictable for sleeping outside," she said, "and you're still recovering from your injuries. But we should probably discuss what happens when your arm heals and people expect you to move on." "What would you like to happen?" Sam asked, his attention focused intently on her face. The directness of his question caught Lucy off guard. What did she want? The honest answer was complex and frightening. She wanted the companionship to continue, wanted the shared purpose that made each day feel meaningful rather than merely endured. She wanted someone to talk with in the evenings, someone to share the small triumphs and daily frustrations that marked progress toward completing the house. But wanting such things felt like betrayal of the promise she'd made at Jonah's graveside, and admitting them would cross boundaries she'd established for both their protection. "I want the house finished before the baby comes," she said finally. "Beyond that, I try not to plan too far ahead." Sam nodded as if her answer contained more honesty than she'd intended to reveal. "Fair enough," he said, returning to his carving. "We'll take things as they come and make decisions when they're required." As he worked, Lucy found herself watching the careful movements of his hands, the way he shaped the wood with patience and skill that spoke of long practice. The rattle taking form under his attention would outlast his presence, becoming something her child would hold and treasure long after Sam Colter had returned to whatever trails called him away from her small corner of the desert. The thought should have brought comfort, a tangible reminder of kindness received during a difficult time. Instead, it filled her with an unexpected sadness, as if she were already mourning the loss of something she'd never actually possessed. The evening meal had become the day's most dangerous hour, when the shared fatigue of honest work created an intimacy that Lucy struggled to maintain at safe distance. Tonight, as she ladled beans and salt pork onto Sam's plate, she caught herself preparing the dish exactly as Jonah had preferred. It extra onion, a dash of molasses for sweetness, cornbread on the side instead of hardtack. The realization stopped, her cold wooden spoon suspended over the pot as she recognized what she was doing. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, she'd begun unconsciously treating Sam like a husband rather than a temporary guest, anticipating his preferences and taking satisfaction in providing meals that pleased him. "Something wrong?" Sam asked, noting her sudden stillness. "No," Lucy replied quickly, finishing the serving and settling across from him at the rough plank table he'd constructed from leftover lumber. "Just thinking about tomorrow's work." But Sam's observant eyes had caught something in her expression, and she suspected he understood more about her momentary confusion than she was comfortable acknowledging. He had a way of seeing through her careful composure to the uncertainty beneath, reading the emotions she tried to keep hidden, even from herself. "This is Jonah's favorite meal," she said finally, deciding that honesty served better than evasion. "I made it for him at least once a week during our marriage. I didn't realize I was doing it again until just now." Sam tasted the beans thoughtfully, his expression revealing appreciation for both the food and the trust implicit in her admission. He had good taste. "It's the best meal I've had in longer than I care to calculate." "You eat in restaurants and hotels when you're traveling?" "When I can afford them, and they're available. But cattle country doesn't offer many dining establishments. Most of the time it's whatever I can cook over a campfire or cold provisions from my saddlebags." Sam broke off a piece of cornbread, using it to soak up the rich bean liquor. "This is what I imagine home cooking tastes like." "You never had home cooking growing up?" "My mother cooked for 9 people on a wood stove that worked when it felt like it. Everything was quantity over refinement. Fill the bellies so everyone could work the next day. Good food, but not the kind of careful preparation that comes from cooking for someone you love." Lucy felt heat rise in her cheeks at his casual reference to love in connection with her cooking. "I don't. That is, I just like to do things properly. It doesn't mean—" "Easy," Sam said gently, apparently recognizing her flustered state. "I didn't mean to suggest anything improper. Just acknowledging that you take care with details, put thought into making things pleasant. It's a gift not everyone possesses." His calm response diffused her panic, but left her uncomfortably aware of how easily she'd betrayed the emotional investment she was developing in his comfort and satisfaction. When had Sam Colter's opinions begun to matter more than maintaining appropriate distance? "Tell me about your work," she said, deliberately steering the conversation towards safer topics. "You said you scout cattle for various ranchers. What does that involve exactly?" Sam seemed to understand her need for neutral ground and accepted the change of subject without comment, mostly checking on herds in remote areas where ranchers can't maintain regular oversight. "I might spend weeks following a particular group, making sure they're healthy, haven't wandered into dangerous territory, aren't being bothered by predators or rustlers." "That sounds lonely." "It is, but it's also peaceful in ways that settlement life never manages. Just you, your horse, and country that stretches to the horizon in every direction. Makes a man feel both small and significant at the same time." Lucy tried to imagine such solitude, comparing it to her own isolation on the claim. "Don't you ever want company, someone to share the experience with?" "Sometimes, especially during the beautiful moment's sunset over red rock country, or finding a hidden valley with grass so rich it looks like green velvet. Those are the times when being alone feels like a limitation rather than a choice." But you keep choosing it, Lucy observed. Sam was quiet for a moment, apparently considering how much to reveal. Habit, maybe. Or fear that settling down means giving up the freedom to leave when things get complicated. What kind of complications? The kind that arise when you start caring more about staying than going, when other people's needs become more important than your own independence. He met her eyes directly. The kind I'm discovering right here, right now. Lucy's breath caught at the implication of his words. The careful boundaries she'd established suddenly felt as fragile as the canvas roof over their heads, inadequate protection against forces she hadn't adequately anticipated. "Sam," she began, but he held up his hand to forestall whatever warning she was preparing to deliver. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quietly, "just acknowledging what's happening between us, whether we intended it or not. You're a woman worth staying for, Lucy Barrow. A man would be a fool not to recognize that." The simple statement hit her with more impact than flowery declarations might have achieved. Sam wasn't pressuring her for reciprocation or demanding she abandon her carefully maintained resolve. He was simply stating a truth that they both felt but had been avoiding in their daily interactions. "I made a promise," Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know, and I respect that promise, even if I don't entirely understand it." Sam reached across the table to touch her hand briefly, a gesture of comfort rather than possession. Jonah must have been quite a man to inspire such loyalty. He was. Lucy felt tears threaten, not just for Jonah's memory, but for the impossible situation she found herself in. He was gentle and patient, and completely devoted to building something lasting. He deserved a wife who could love him without reservation. "And you did love him without reservation," Sam said with certainty. "Anyone can see that in how you're working to finish what he started, how you speak his name, how you honor his memory in a dozen small ways every day." "Then you understand why I can't." "I understand why you think you can't," Sam corrected. "But I'm not asking you to dishonor Jonah's memory or abandon the promises you made. I'm just suggesting that maybe there's room in a woman's heart for more than one kind of love, more than one season of happiness." Lucy pulled her hand away, needing physical distance to think clearly. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it? You loved Jonah with the passion of youth, built dreams together, created something beautiful that ended too soon. That doesn't mean you're incapable of loving differently with the wisdom of experience, the knowledge of life's fragility, the gratitude for second chances that some people never receive." His words painted a picture that was both appealing and terrifying, a future she'd refused to let herself imagine. But the very fact that she found his argument compelling proved how dangerous her feelings for Sam had become. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think about what you've said, time to understand what I'm feeling." "Time we have," Sam replied. "The house won't be finished for weeks yet, and I'm not going anywhere until it is, maybe longer, if you'll have me." The qualification in his last sentence, "if you'll have me," reminded Lucy that Sam was offering himself without guarantees, accepting whatever terms she could manage, rather than demanding more than she was prepared to give. Such patience was both gift and burden, removing the pressure of immediate decision while leaving her to wrestle with questions that had no easy answers. "I should clean up," she said, standing to gather their empty plates. Sam rose as well, reaching for his dishes with the automatic courtesy that had marked all his interactions with her. "I'll help." As they worked together in companionable silence, Lucy found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, at the wash basin, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers as they moved in the small space. Such casual contact should have felt intrusive or inappropriate. Instead, it felt like a preview of the domestic partnership he was offering, the possibility of shared tasks and mutual support that could extend far beyond the completion of her cottage. When the last plate was clean and dried, Sam stepped back to give her space, but his eyes remained on her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. "Thank you," he said, "for the meal, for the honesty, for not asking me to leave before we've finished this conversation." "We haven't finished it," Lucy pointed out. "No," Sam agreed, "but we've started it, and sometimes starting is the hardest part." Lucy found Jonah's reading glasses while searching through the trunk for her mother's sewing kit, needing to let out the waist of her only remaining dress that still accommodated her growing belly. The spectacles lay wrapped in tissue paper beneath letters she'd written to her sister but never sent, their wireframes bent from hasty packing during Jonah's final illness. She lifted them carefully, remembering how distinguished they'd made him look during evening hours when he'd read aloud from the agricultural journals that arrived sporadically through the mail. Jonah had been proud of those glasses, purchased from a traveling optometrist who'd promised they'd help with the eye strain that came from years of squinting against desert sun and wind. The lenses caught the afternoon light streaming through the cabin's single window, casting rainbow fragments across the rough plank floor. Lucy held them up to her own eyes, seeing the world transformed into soft-edged clarity that felt like looking at life through water. Everything appeared gentler through Jonah's prescription, more forgiving of harsh edges and uncomfortable truths. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Sam asked from behind her, returning from his afternoon work on the roof supports. Lucy turned, still holding the glasses, and saw Sam's concerned expression blur into something that looked almost like tenderness. She lowered the spectacles, bringing him back into sharp focus, and felt a sudden understanding of why she'd been avoiding this moment of direct confrontation with Jonah's possessions. "His reading glasses," she said unnecessarily, since Sam could clearly see what she held. "I'd forgotten I packed them." Sam approached slowly, recognizing the emotional weight of her discovery. He was a reader. Every evening after supper, agricultural journals mostly, but sometimes poetry or scripture. He had a beautiful voice for reading aloud. Lucy traced the bent frame with one finger. "He'd sit right there by the window, and I'd listen while I mended or worked on needlework. Sounds peaceful." It was. We had such plans for quiet evenings in this house, him reading while I rocked the baby. Both of us watching our child grow up surrounded by books and learning. Lucy felt the familiar ache that accompanied any reference to the future she and Jonah would never share. Sam settled onto the wooden crate that served as his usual seat, giving her space to process whatever emotions the glasses had stirred. Those evenings can still happen. Maybe not exactly as you originally planned, but children need stories and learning regardless of who provides them. "You're suggesting you might be the one providing them?" Lucy asked, hearing the challenge in her own voice. "I'm suggesting that denying your child access to books and education because their father isn't here to provide them would be a different kind of tragedy." Sam's response was gentle but firm. "Jonah's glasses can't read to the baby, Lucy, but someone else's voice could carry on that tradition he established." The practical truth of his observation warred with Lucy's emotional resistance to imagining anyone taking Jonah's place in the domestic rituals that had defined their marriage. "It wouldn't be the same." "No," Sam agreed. "It wouldn't be the same. It would be different, maybe better in some ways, maybe not as good in others. But it would be real and present instead of lost and mourned." Lucy carefully rewrapped the glasses in their tissue paper, needing something to do with her hands while she processed his words. "You make it sound simple." "I don't mean to. I know it's not simple. You're carrying grief and love and fear and hope, all tangled together in ways that probably make clear thinking impossible most days." Sam leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when explaining construction techniques. "But maybe you're looking at your future through the wrong lens." "What do you mean?" "You're trying to see what comes next through Jonah's glasses, through the plans you made together, the dreams that belong to your marriage with him. But those glasses can't show you what's actually in front of you now, any more than they could help you see clearly when you held them to your eyes." Lucy understood his metaphor, even as she resisted its implications. "So I should just forget everything Jonah and I planned? Pretend those years never happened?" "The opposite. You should honor what you built together by recognizing that it gave you the wisdom and strength to build something new when circumstances required it." Sam stood and moved to the window, looking out at the half-finished walls that represented both past dreams and future possibilities. "Jonah loved you enough to want you to be happy. Do you really think he'd want you to spend the rest of your life mourning what ended, instead of celebrating what could begin? The question hung in the air between them, challenging assumptions Lucy had been afraid to examine. She'd constructed her identity as a widow around the belief that continued mourning demonstrated the depth of her love for Jonah. But what if that mourning had become a barrier to the kind of life Jonah himself would have wanted for her? "I don't know how to stop being his wife," she admitted quietly. "You don't have to stop being his wife. You just have to learn how to be more than only his wife." Sam turned back to face her, his expression serious but not pressuring. "The love you shared with Jonah is part of who you are now. It doesn't disappear or become less important because you discover you're capable of loving again." Lucy felt tears threaten as the truth of his words resonated deeper than her conscious resistance. "But the promise I made was made by a woman in grief who couldn't imagine any future beyond the pain of that moment. You're not that woman anymore, Lucy. You're stronger, wiser, more capable than you were when you made that vow. Maybe it's time to trust your current judgment instead of being bound by decisions made when clear thinking was impossible. And if I'm wrong, if I let myself care for you and then lose you too?" Sam crossed the small space between them, stopping just close enough that she could see the silver threading through his hair, the lines that spoke of years spent in weather and wind. "Then you'll grieve again and eventually heal again, because that's what strong people do. But if you never allow yourself to care for anyone again, you'll spend the rest of your life grieving a death that hasn't happened yet." His logic was undeniable, but accepting it meant abandoning the protective walls she'd built around her heart since Jonah's death. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. So am I. Caring for someone means risking loss, and I've spent years avoiding exactly that risk." Sam reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she needed to, and gently touched her hand. "But watching you these past weeks, seeing your courage, your determination, your capacity for kindness, even when you're struggling with your own challenges, made me realize that some risks are worth taking." Lucy looked down at their joined hands, noting how different Sam's touch felt from Jonah's. Her husband's hands had been soft from indoor work, gentle with the careful tenderness of someone who'd never had to fight for survival. Sam's hands bore the calluses and scars of a man who'd lived harder, worked in weather, faced dangers that required quick decisions and physical courage. Different, but not wrong. Not betrayal, but simply the reality that different seasons of life brought different kinds of love, different sources of strength and comfort. "What are you asking of me?" she said finally. "Permission to court you properly. Time to discover what we might build together if we're both willing to try. The chance to prove that I'm not asking you to replace what you had with Jonah, but to create something new that honors both your past and your future." Lucy felt the baby move as if responding to the emotional intensity of the moment, reminding her that her decisions affected more than just her own heart. This child would grow up with whatever choice she made now, would be shaped by her courage or fear, her willingness to embrace possibility, or her determination to remain safely isolated. "I need to think," she said, not withdrawing her hand from his, but not committing to more than continued conversation. "Of course, this isn't a decision that should be rushed." Sam squeezed her fingers gently before releasing them. "But while you're thinking, remember that Jonah's glasses can't show you the path forward. You have to trust your own eyes for that." As evening approached and they prepared their simple meal together, Lucy found herself watching Sam with new attention, trying to see him clearly rather than through the lens of guilt and obligation that had clouded her judgment. What she saw was a man who'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier, who worked beside her without demanding anything in return, who offered his heart without conditions or ultimatums. Perhaps it was time to stop looking backward through broken lenses and learn to see the present with eyes unclouded by fear. Perhaps it was time to trust that love, like the adobe walls they were building together, could cure strongest when mixed with living water rather than the salt of endless tears. The papers fell from Sam's saddlebags when Lucy moved them to make room for the medical supplies she was organizing in case of complications during labor. Legal documents scattered across the cabin floor like autumn leaves, and as she bent to gather them, the formal language of a property deed caught her attention. "Territory of New Mexico," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Section 12, Township 8 South, Range 15 East." The description matched her own land claim exactly, but the name on the deed was Samuel Colter, dated 6 months before Jonah's death. Lucy's hands trembled as she read the document again, ensuring she hadn't misunderstood its significance. Sam owned the 40 acres directly adjacent to her claim, the land where his horse had supposedly thrown him, where his accidental fall had brought them together. The land he'd been crossing when coincidence had placed him in her life at exactly the moment she needed help most. "Lucy?" Sam's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his face draining of color as he saw the papers in her hands. "When were you going to tell me?" she asked, rising slowly, the deed clutched against her chest. "When were you going to mention that you own the property next to mine?" Sam stepped into the cabin, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "It's not what you're thinking." "How do you know what I'm thinking? How do you know anything about what I think or feel when everything between us has been built on lies?" "Not lies," Sam said firmly. "Omissions, maybe. Timing that I handled poorly, but never lies about anything that mattered." Lucy stared at him, seeing a stranger where she'd thought she was beginning to know the man. "Your horse didn't throw you accidentally, did it? You were already on your own property when it happened. You've been watching me, haven't you? Watching me struggle alone while you decided whether or not to help." Sam's silence confirmed her worst suspicions, and Lucy felt the foundations of trust she'd been building crumble like poorly mixed adobe in rain. "How long?" she demanded. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since Jonah died," Sam admitted quietly. "I was checking my land boundaries when I saw the funeral procession heading to the cemetery. Asked around town about who had died. Learned about the widow left alone on the claim with a baby coming. And you decided I'd make an interesting project? A charity case to occupy your time? I decided that a pregnant woman trying to finish a homestead alone might need help, even if she was too proud to ask for it." Sam's voice remained steady despite the anger he could clearly see building in Lucy's expression. "So I arranged for supplies to be delivered. Made sure the general store knew to extend credit if you needed it. Kept an eye on things from a distance." Lucy felt heat rise in her cheeks as understanding dawned. "You're the one who's been sending supplies. The extra flour, the medical kit that appeared on my doorstep, the lumber that showed up with a note saying it was ordered but never claimed." "Yes. And the accident? The broken arm that gave you an excuse to stay?" Sam hesitated, and Lucy saw the truth in his reluctance to answer. "The horse did step in a prairie dog hole. The fall did break my arm. But I was riding closer to your property line than I normally would have been." "You staged it," Lucy said, her voice flat with betrayal. "I positioned myself where an accident was more likely to affect you directly, yes, but I didn't fake the injuries or manufacture the need for help." Lucy sank onto the wooden crate that had become her usual seat, the deed still clutched in her hands. Everything she'd believed about their meeting, about Sam's character, about her own judgment, suddenly felt suspect. Why? If you wanted to help, why not just introduce yourself properly? Why the deception? Sam moved carefully to the opposite side of the small space, apparently recognizing her need for distance. "Because a pregnant widow has no reason to trust a strange man who appears at her door offering help. Because independence matters to you, and accepting charity from a neighbor would have felt like failure. Because I wanted to know what kind of woman you were before I revealed my interest in more than your welfare." "Your interest in more than my welfare," Lucy repeated. "How long have you been planning this? How long have you been maneuvering to insert yourself into my life?" "It wasn't like that," Sam protested. "I bought the land because it's good grazing country with access to water. The location next to your claim was coincidence, not strategy. But once I learned about your situation, once I started watching you work—" "Watching me," Lucy interrupted. "Spying on me. Keeping an eye on you from a respectful distance. Making sure you were safe. that you had what you needed to survive. Without my knowledge or consent. Sam was quiet for a moment, apparently recognizing that his good intentions didn't excuse the deception. You're right. I should have approached you honestly from the beginning. Should have introduced myself as your neighbor and offered help directly. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid you'd refuse it, afraid you'd see me as just another man trying to take advantage of your vulnerability, afraid that my reputation as a drifter would make you suspicious of my motives. Lucy studied his face, trying to separate truth from justification in his explanations. And what are your motives, Sam? What do you really want from me? What I told you before, the chance to court you properly, to build something meaningful together. But I wanted to earn that chance through actions, not words. Wanted you to know me as a man who could be trusted with your welfare before you knew me as a man with romantic intentions. So you decided to manipulate circumstances instead of giving me the choice to make my own decisions about who to trust and why. The accusation hit its mark, and Sam's shoulders sagged with apparent recognition of his error. You're right. I was trying to protect both of us from rejection, but I ended up betraying the honesty that should form the foundation of anything we might build together. Lucy set the deed on the table between them, its presence a tangible reminder of how much she didn't know about the man she'd been considering as a potential husband. What else haven't you told me? What other secrets are you keeping? None that affect you directly. My past relationships, my reasons for avoiding settlement until now, those are conversations for later, if we have a later. But there are no other deceptions, no other hidden facts that would change how you see our situation. How can I believe that? How can I trust anything you've told me when the entire basis of our relationship was built on lies? Sam leaned forward, his expression earnest despite the growing distance between them. Because everything else has been real, Lucy. My injuries were real. My respect for your strength and determination is real. My feelings for you are real. The work we've done together, the conversations we've shared, the connection we've built, none of that was pretense. But it was all based on false premises. I thought I was helping an injured stranger, making my own choice to offer charity to someone in need. Instead, I was being managed by someone who'd already decided what was best for me. The truth of her words settled over them both like dust after a windstorm. Lucy felt the careful trust she'd been building collapse into suspicion and hurt, while Sam apparently recognized that his well-intentioned deception had destroyed the very thing he'd been trying to protect. "What happens now?" Sam asked quietly. Lucy touched her belly, feeling the baby's movement as a reminder that her decisions affected more than just her own wounded pride. "I don't know. I need time to think, time to decide whether what we've built together is strong enough to survive the discovery that it was built on sand instead of solid ground. And if you decide it isn't, then you'll need to find somewhere else to finish recovering, and I'll finish this house the way I started it alone." Lucy's voice caught slightly on the last word, betraying the fact that solitude no longer felt like protection so much as punishment. Sam nodded slowly, accepting her right to make that choice, even as disappointment shadowed his features. "I'll respect whatever decision you make. But I hope you'll remember that people can make mistakes in method without being mistaken about their essential feelings. I hope you'll consider that the man who's worked beside you these past weeks, who shared your meals and your concerns and your hopes for the future, that man is real, regardless of how he first arrived at your doorstep." As Sam gathered his scattered papers and prepared to give her the space she'd requested, Lucy found herself torn between anger at his deception and recognition that his actions, however misguided, had sprung from genuine care for her welfare. The question now was whether trust once broken could be rebuilt, and whether her own capacity for forgiveness was strong enough to overcome the hurt of discovering that even her independence had been partially illusion. The deed lay on the table between them like a bridge. Neither was sure how to cross evidence of deception, but also proof that Sam's investment in her future went deeper than mere attraction or temporary convenience. Whether that investment represented hope or burden would depend on decisions she wasn't yet ready to make. The first contraction struck Lucy at dawn 3 days after her confrontation with Sam about the deed, a sharp tightening across her belly that stole her breath and sent her stumbling against the cabin's rough wall. Too early, she thought desperately. The baby wasn't due for another month, and she'd planned to have those weeks to decide whether to trust Sam enough to accept his help during labor. "Lucy?" Sam's voice came from outside, where he'd been sleeping since their argument, maintaining respectful distance while remaining close enough to help if needed. "Everything all right?" Another contraction gripped her before she could answer, stronger than the first. And Lucy knew, with the certainty born of female intuition, that her child was coming regardless of timing or preparation. "Sam," she called, trying to keep panic from her voice. "I need you." He appeared in the doorway instantly, taking in her pale face and the way she gripped the wall for support. "The baby?" "Yes." "Too early, but yes." Lucy breathed carefully through the subsiding pain, counting the seconds until it released its grip. "I need you to ride to town. Bring back Mrs. Patterson. She's the closest thing to a midwife we have." Sam was already moving toward his gear, pulling on boots and reaching for his hat. "How far apart are the pains?" This was only the second, but they're strong. Stronger than they should be for early labor. Lucy forced herself to move toward the supplies she'd been gathering, trying to remember everything her mother had told her about childbirth. Sam the storm. For the first time since entering the cabin, Sam looked toward the windows, and Lucy saw his expression change as he took in the ominous black clouds building along the horizon. The monsoon season had arrived early, bringing with it the kind of weather that made travel dangerous and communication impossible. "I'll make it," he said firmly. "The storms usually don't hit until afternoon. And if you don't? If you get caught in flash floods or lightning?" Lucy felt another contraction beginning and gripped the edge of the table. "I can't lose you too, Sam. Not now." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, revealing more about her feelings than she'd intended to share while their relationship remained unresolved. Sam paused in his preparations, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that cut through their recent tension. "You won't lose me," he said quietly. "I promise you that, but I need to try to reach help while I still can." Lucy nodded, understanding the necessity even as fear clawed at her chest. "If the weather turns bad, don't try to push through. Come back. We'll manage somehow." "We'll manage regardless," Sam said, moving to her side as the contraction peaked. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Lucy Barrow. This baby's lucky to have you as a mother." As the pain subsided, Lucy found herself leaning into Sam's steady presence, drawing comfort from his proximity, despite the unresolved issues between them. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. But being scared doesn't mean we can't handle whatever comes." Sam helped her to the bed she'd prepared for labor, ensuring she was comfortable before stepping back. "I'll be back with Mrs. Patterson before evening. You rest and try to stay calm." "Sam," Lucy caught his hand as he turned to leave. "About the deed, about what we discussed." "That can wait," he interrupted gently. "Right now, nothing matters except getting you and this baby through safely. Everything else we'll figure out later." After Sam departed, Lucy found herself alone with the growing intensity of labor and the approaching storm. She moved restlessly around the small cabin, following instincts that told her movement helped more than lying still. The contractions came every 15 minutes, then every 10, each one lasting longer and gripping harder than the last. Through the windows, she watched the sky darken with unnatural speed, clouds building into towering thunderheads that promised the kind of violent weather that could wash away roads and turn creek beds into raging torrents. By midday, the first drops of rain were spattering against the glass, and Lucy knew Sam was facing a choice between his promise to return with help and his safety on increasingly dangerous trails. The baby moved constantly now, as if sensing the approaching moment of birth, and Lucy found herself talking to the child she would soon meet. "Easy, little one," she murmured during a particularly strong contraction. "I know you're ready to see the world, but let's try to wait for help, shall we?" But babies, she was learning, followed their own schedules regardless of human convenience. The contractions intensified through the afternoon, coming closer together as the storm built to full fury outside. Rain lashed the windows, and wind howled around the cabin's corners, while inside, Lucy paced and breathed and tried to remember everything she'd been told about managing labor alone. She'd prepared supplies weeks ago: clean cloths, hot water, sharp scissors, cord for tying, but having the materials and knowing how to use them properly were different challenges entirely. Her mother had died when Lucy was 16, taking with her the feminine wisdom that should have passed from generation to generation. Mrs. Patterson in town had promised to attend the birth, but Mrs. Patterson was miles away through flooding country that might be impassable. As evening approached with no sign of Sam's return, Lucy was forced to accept that she would likely face this challenge alone. The contractions now came every 5 minutes, each one demanding her complete attention as her body prepared for the work of bringing new life into the world. She'd lit extra candles against the gathering darkness when she heard hoofbeats approaching through the storm. Hope flared in her chest, Sam returning with help, arriving just in time to assist with the birth. But when the door opened, only Sam entered, his clothes soaked and his expression grim. "Mrs. Patterson," Lucy gasped between contractions. Creeks flooded, bridges out, and the fords too dangerous to cross. Sam shed his wet coat and immediately moved to the wash basin to clean his hands. "It's just us, Lucy." "But we can do this. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of them manage just fine." "Most of them had experienced help," Lucy pointed out, trying to keep fear from overwhelming her practical thinking. "And you have me. I may not be experienced with human births, but I've helped deliver more calves and foals than I can count. The basic principles are the same: stay calm, let nature do its work, and intervene only when absolutely necessary." Another contraction gripped Lucy, stronger than any before, and she felt something shift inside her as her body began the final stages of labor. "Sam," she gasped. I think it's time." Sam's expression grew serious as he assessed her condition. "All right, let's get you comfortable and see about bringing your baby safely into the world." As the storm raged outside and the contractions intensified beyond anything Lucy had imagined possible, she found herself grateful for Sam's presence, despite their unresolved conflicts. Whether their relationship survived this night or not, she would face the birth of her child with someone who cared about her welfare. Someone willing to risk his own safety to ensure she didn't labor alone. The baby kicked vigorously, as if impatient with the delay, and Lucy pressed her hand to her belly with a mixture of anticipation and terror. Everything she'd worked for, dreamed of, and feared was about to culminate in this small cabin, while wind and rain tested the walls Sam had helped her build. "We're going to be fine," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying a confidence that steadied her racing heart. "All three of us are going to be just fine." Lucy wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, as her body prepared for the hardest work of her life. Outside, the storm reached its peak intensity, but inside the cabin, two people who'd found each other through accident and circumstance prepared to welcome the child who would determine the shape of whatever future they might build together. The final stage of labor began as the storm reached its peak, rain hammering the cabin roof with a fury that matched the intensity building within Lucy's body. Sam had arranged clean cloths and hot water with methodical precision, his calm demeanor providing the steady anchor she needed as pain consumed her awareness in waves. "The baby's coming," Lucy gasped, feeling the unmistakable urge to push that signaled the end of waiting. "Sam, I can feel." "I know. I can see." Sam positioned himself where he could assist the birth, his weathered hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting together. "On the next contraction, work with your body. Don't fight the pressure." Lucy gripped the blanket Sam had woven from scraps of her own fabric and his spare shirt, a patchwork creation that represented their partnership in ways she was only beginning to understand. The contraction built like a wave, carrying her toward a moment that would change everything about her future. She pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed, feeling her child move lower with agonizing slowness. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, yet beneath it ran a current of anticipation so powerful it transformed suffering into purpose. "Good," Sam encouraged, his voice carrying absolute confidence in her ability to complete this work. "The head's crowning. One more push like that, and we'll have our baby." Our baby. The phrase should have felt presumptuous given the unresolved tension between them, but in this moment of shared crisis, it felt like simple truth. Sam was here, present and committed to ensuring both her safety and her child's successful arrival. Whatever deceptions had brought them together seemed less important than the reality of what they were creating in this storm-lashed cabin. The next contraction built with even greater intensity, and Lucy pushed with everything she had, feeling her daughter slip free in a rush of fluid and relief that left her gasping with exhaustion and triumph. "She's beautiful," Sam whispered, cradling the tiny form with hands that trembled slightly despite their steadiness throughout the ordeal. "Lucy, she's perfect." Lucy struggled to sit up, desperate to see her child, and Sam carefully placed the baby on her chest, skin to skin, as nature intended. The infant was smaller than expected, but clearly healthy, with Jonah's dark hair and features that were still forming but promised beauty. "Hello, little one," Lucy murmured, tears streaming down her cheeks as she touched her daughter's tiny fingers. "Welcome to the world." The baby opened eyes that were startlingly blue Sam's shade rather than Jonah's brown and seemed to study her mother's face with solemn attention. Her cry was strong and demanding, announcing her presence with the indignation of someone who'd been kept waiting too long for proper introductions. "She knows you," Sam observed, gently cleaning the infant while allowing her to remain close to Lucy. "Look how she's watching your face." "She's so small," Lucy worried, studying her daughter's delicate features. "Are you sure she's all right?" "She's small but perfectly formed. Listen to those lungs. Nothing wrong with her breathing or her vocal cords." Sam worked efficiently to complete the necessary tasks that followed birth, his gentle competence reassuring Lucy that despite his lack of experience with human delivery, he understood what needed to be done. As the immediate crisis passed and the baby settled into the rhythm of nursing, Lucy found herself studying Sam's face in the candlelight. His expression as he watched her daughter was filled with a tenderness that spoke of genuine affection rather than mere duty. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying, for helping, for not letting me face this alone." Sam met her eyes over the baby's head. "Thank you for trusting me despite everything that's gone wrong between us, for letting me be part of this moment." The storm outside was beginning to subside, rain gentling from hammering fury to steady precipitation that would nourish the desert rather than destroy it. Inside the cabin, the three of them existed in a bubble of warm light and new beginnings, connected by the primal experience of birth and the uncertain promise of what might follow. "What will you name her?" Sam asked, reaching out to stroke the baby's cheek with one careful finger. Lucy had considered names for months, but looking at her daughter now, only one felt right. "Sarah," she said. "It means princess, and she's the most precious thing in my world." "Sarah," Sam repeated, testing the sound. "It suits her perfectly." As the baby dozed against Lucy's chest, exhaustion began to claim her attention. The physical ordeal of birth had drained her reserves, but beneath the fatigue lay a satisfaction deeper than anything she'd ever experienced. Her daughter was safe, healthy, and real, no longer the abstract promise of future joy, but a tangible person with needs and preferences and the absolute right to be loved without reservation. "Sam," Lucy said drowsily, "about the deed, about what you told me." "Rest now," Sam interrupted gently. "Everything else can wait until you've slept. Sarah needs her mother strong and healthy." But Lucy felt the need to speak, while courage and clarity remained. "I'm still hurt by the deception, still angry that you didn't trust me enough to be honest from the beginning." Sam nodded, accepting her right to those feelings. "I understand. But I'm also grateful. Grateful you were here tonight. Grateful you cared enough to watch over me, even when I didn't know it. Grateful that Sarah will have memories of someone who helped bring her safely into the world." Those memories will be real regardless of what you decide about us, Sam assured her. Lucy shifted carefully, settling Sarah more comfortably against her chest. I'm not ready to make decisions about us yet, but I'm not asking you to leave, either. Sarah deserves to know the man who helped deliver her, and the two need time to sort through everything I'm feeling. Time we have, Sam replied, echoing his earlier promise. As much time as you need to feel certain about whatever choice you make. As Lucy drifted towards sleep with her daughter warm against her heart, she felt the first stirrings of possibility she'd allowed herself since Jonah's death. Not certainty, not yet, but the recognition that hearts could indeed expand to hold new love alongside cherished memories, that children could be blessed by multiple sources of affection and guidance, that second chances sometimes came disguised as storms that forced people to shelter together until trust could grow in the space between them. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having washed the desert air clean and left the world gleaming with moisture and possibility. Lucy woke to find Sam sitting beside her bed, baby Sarah cradled in his arms as he hummed a soft tune that seemed to fascinate the infant completely. "How long have you been holding her?" Lucy asked, stretching muscles that ached from the previous night's ordeal. "About an hour. She was fussing, and you needed sleep, so I offered to take a turn." Sam's voice was soft with wonder as he studied Sarah's tiny features. "She's got quite a grip for someone so small." Lucy watched them together, noting how naturally Sam had assumed the caretaking role, how Sarah seemed to recognize his voice and find comfort in his presence. The sight stirred emotions she wasn't quite ready to examine, but couldn't entirely suppress. "You're a natural with babies," she observed. "Had plenty of practice with my nieces and nephews when they were small. Children seem to sense when someone genuinely cares about their welfare." Sam looked up from Sarah to meet Lucy's eyes. "She's extraordinary, Lucy, perfect in every way." As if responding to the praise, Sarah made a small sound and opened her eyes, gazing up at Sam with the serious attention that seemed to be her natural expression. Lucy felt her heart contract with love so fierce it was almost painful, watching her daughter study the man who'd helped bring her safely into the world. "I've been thinking," Sam said carefully, "about what happens next, about practical things that need addressing, such as birth records for one thing. Sarah needs to be officially registered, which means a trip to town when you're strong enough to travel, and we should probably let Mrs. Patterson know everything went well, ease her mind about not being able to get through during the storm." Lucy nodded, appreciating his attention to practical details. "What else?" Sam hesitated, apparently weighing his words carefully. "The cottage still needs finishing before the next storm season. Sarah's going to need a proper home, not just temporary shelter. I can continue the work as soon as I've recovered from the birth." "You could," Sam agreed, "but you'll also be caring for a newborn, which is exhausting work all by itself. And Sarah deserves to have her mother's attention focused on her needs, not divided between construction and childcare." Lucy understood the implication of his words, but needed him to speak plainly. "What are you suggesting?" "That you let me finish the house, not as repayment for your help during my recovery, not out of obligation or charity, but because Sarah deserves a completed home, and you deserve to focus on being her mother without worrying about construction deadlines." The offer was generous and practical, but Lucy found herself hesitating for reasons that had nothing to do with pride or independence. "And after the house is finished, what then?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on Sarah's sleeping face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of careful consideration. "I've been carrying this around since yesterday, waiting for the right moment to give it to you." He reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. "Made it from silver I had the blacksmith melt down from my old spurs, the ones that broke when I fell." Lucy accepted the package with trembling fingers, unwrapping it to reveal a compass no larger than her palm, its silver surface polished to mirror brightness. Engraved around the edge were the words, "For Sarah May you always find your true direction." "It's beautiful," Lucy whispered, turning the compass over to study the craftsmanship. But why? Because my wandering days are over, Sam said simply. That compass represents 30 years of following trails that led everywhere except where I actually wanted to be. I want Sarah to have it as a reminder that sometimes the most important direction is the one that leads you home. Lucy felt tears threaten as the full meaning of his gesture became clear. You're saying you want to stay permanently. I'm saying I want to ask you to marry me, Lucy Barrow. Not because you need taking care of, not because Sarah needs a father, but because the three of us together feel like the family I never knew I was looking for. The proposal hung in the air between them, more powerful for its simplicity and the timing that made it feel like natural conclusion rather than impulsive romance. Lucy looked from the compass to Sam's face, seeing in his expression the same wonder she felt when she looked at her daughter, the recognition of something precious and worth protecting. I'm still angry about the deception, she said honestly. I know, and you have every right to be. And I'm still scared about risking my heart again. I know that too. Fear makes sense after what you've been through. Lucy studied the compass face, noting how the needle trembled slightly before settling on true north. But I'm also tired of being angry and scared. Tired of making decisions based on what might go wrong instead of what might go right. Sam waited, apparently understanding that this was her moment to choose, her decision to make without pressure or persuasion. Yes, Lucy said quietly, the word escaping before she could second-guess her courage. Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Colter. The smile that spread across Sam's features was bright enough to rival the morning sun streaming through the cabin windows. He leaned forward carefully, mindful of the baby in his arms, and kissed Lucy with gentle reverence that spoke of gratitude rather than passion. Thank you, he whispered against her forehead, for trusting me despite my mistakes, for giving us a chance to build something real together. As Sarah stirred and made the soft sounds that indicated hunger, Lucy felt the pieces of her new life settling into place, like the final course of adobe bricks completing a wall. She would marry Sam not to replace what she'd lost with Jonah, but to create something different and equally precious. Sarah would grow up knowing the love of the man who'd helped to deliver her, who'd given up his wandering to provide stability and guidance. When? She asked, accepting Sarah from Sam's arms and settling the baby to nurse. Whenever you're ready. Next month, next year, I'm not going anywhere. Lucy thought of the promise she'd made at Jonah's graveside, the vow that had seemed so important when grief was her only companion. Now, watching Sam's gentle interaction with her daughter, feeling the contentment that came from no longer facing challenges alone, that promise felt less like sacred obligation and more like the fear-driven decision it had actually been. Next month, she decided, after Sarah's been properly introduced to the community, after we've had time to let people adjust to the idea of us together. Perfect, Sam agreed. Gives me time to finish the house, time for you to recover completely, time for all of us to get used to being a family. As the morning progressed and neighbors began arriving to check on Lucy's welfare after the storm, word spread quickly about Sarah's arrival and Sam's presence during the birth. By afternoon, the small cabin was filled with women offering congratulations and practical assistance, men discussing the best techniques for completing the adobe construction, and children eager to meet the newest member of their scattered community. Through it all, Lucy watched Sam integrate naturally into the social fabric that would define their future, accepting congratulations on Sarah's safe arrival, discussing construction schedules with the men, and demonstrating the kind of steady reliability that marked him as someone the community could trust and respect. The compass sat on the table beside Lucy's bed, its presence a constant reminder that some journeys ended not with arrival at a distant destination, but with the recognition that home had been waiting in the place where love took root and chose to stay. 3 months after Sarah's birth, Lucy stood in the doorway of her completed cottage, watching Sam teach their daughter the difference between a hammer and a wrench, while autumn sunlight streamed through windows that perfectly framed the view Jonah had envisioned. The walls were solid, the roof secure, and every detail finished with the care that came from building something meant to last generations. Today was their wedding day. The simple gold band Sam had crafted from melted silver waited in Lucy's jewelry box, its surface deliberately left unpolished to reflect the practical beauty of their frontier life rather than the refined elegance of city customs. Unlike her first wedding ring, which she'd carefully preserved in memory of her marriage to Jonah, this new ring spoke of mature love built on shared work, common purpose, and the deep contentment that came from choosing partnership over solitude. "Are you ready?" Sam asked, settling Sarah in her cradle before turning to help Lucy with the final preparations for their simple ceremony. "More ready than I thought possible 3 months ago," Lucy replied, smoothing the blue dress that had been her mother's wedding gown, altered to fit her post-pregnancy figure and updated with lace that Sarah had grasped during fittings, as if claiming ownership of this new beginning. The ceremony would take place in their front room, with Preacher Williams officiating, and the same neighbors who'd supported them through crisis now gathered to witness their commitment to building a future together. Mrs. Patterson had organized a feast using produce from gardens that had flourished in the rich soil following the monsoon season, while the men had contributed labor to complete the final details of construction that transformed a house into a true home. "Any regrets?" Sam asked, adjusting his collar with hands that still bore the calluses of honest work. Lucy considered the question seriously, looking around the room where she'd labored to bring Sarah into the world, where she and Sam had negotiated the delicate transition from strangers to partners to people preparing to become family in the eyes of God and community. "Only that it took so long to recognize what was right in front of me," she said honestly, "and that Jonah isn't here to see how beautifully his cottage turned out, to meet the daughter he wanted so much." Sam nodded, understanding that her ability to speak Jonah's name without pain represented healing rather than betrayal. "He'd be proud of both of you, proud of how you've honored his memory while building something new." The sound of arriving carriages ended their private moment, and Lucy felt her pulse quicken with anticipation rather than nervousness. She'd married Jonah with the passionate certainty of youth, building dreams on hope and desire for what might be possible. Today she was marrying Sam with the grounded wisdom of experience, choosing partnership based on knowledge of what they could accomplish together when facing both joy and hardship. "Mrs. Barrow?" Preacher Williams appeared in the doorway, his expression warm with approval as he took in the transformation of what had been a construction site into a proper home. "Are you prepared to make your vows?" "We are," Lucy replied, accepting Sam's offered arm as they moved toward the small group gathered in what had become their wedding chapel. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with vows that emphasized partnership and mutual support rather than romantic declarations that might fade when tested by practical challenges. When Preacher Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Sam's kiss was gentle and reverent, acknowledging the gravity of the commitment they'd just made while promising the tenderness that would sustain them through whatever trials marriage might bring. "Ladies and gentlemen," the preacher announced to their small gathering, "I present Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Colter, united in marriage and blessed with the foundation of home, family, and community support that marks the best kind of frontier union." As their neighbors offered congratulations and the celebration began in earnest, Lucy found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a grieving widow, certain that love belonged in the past tense. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate woman trying to complete an impossible task alone. 3 months ago, she'd been a frightened mother facing childbirth without adequate help. Now she was a wife again, but married to a different kind of man in a different season of life. Where Jonah had been gentle and bookish, Sam was practical and weathered by experience. Where her first marriage had been built on shared dreams of what they might accomplish together, this marriage was built on knowledge of what they had already survived and completed as partners. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked, during a quiet moment when the celebration had moved outside to take advantage of the perfect weather. "That hearts really do cure strongest when mixed with living water," Lucy replied, quoting the words from his proposal that had stayed with her through all the weeks of decision and preparation, that some promises are meant to be broken by the right person at the right time, and some promises are meant to be kept for a lifetime, Sam added, touching the new ring on her finger, like the one we just made to each other. Lucy looked through the window to where Sarah slept peacefully in her cradle, surrounded by wedding gifts that spoke of community acceptance and support for their unconventional family. The baby would grow up knowing stories of the father who died before her birth, but she would also know the daily presence of the man who'd chosen to stay and help shape her future. "What happens now?" Lucy asked, echoing the question she'd posed months ago when their relationship had seemed impossibly complicated. "Now we live," Sam replied simply. "We raise Sarah together, we work the land together, we face whatever challenges come next together. We build a life that honors the past while embracing the future." As the sun set over the desert that had tested and shaped them both, Lucy felt the deep satisfaction that came from completing something difficult and worthwhile. The cottage stood solid and beautiful, exactly as Jonah had envisioned, but finished by different hands, working toward a shared goal. Sarah slept secure in the knowledge that she was loved and wanted by the people responsible for her care. And Lucy herself had learned that love, like adobe, could indeed be mixed and shaped multiple times, each iteration stronger and more beautiful than what had come before. The wedding ring caught the last rays of sunlight as she reached to straighten a photograph on the mantella picture of her and Jonah taken shortly after their arrival on the claim, young and hopeful and unaware of how much sorrow and joy the future would bring. Beside it now sat a new photograph taken just days ago, Sam holding Sarah while Lucy leaned against his shoulder, all three of them squinting slightly in the bright desert sun, looking exactly like what they'd become, a family built not by blood or circumstance alone, but by the deliberate choice to love beyond fear and create something lasting from the raw materials of courage, forgiveness, and hope. Outside, their neighbors continued celebrating under stars that seemed brighter than usual, as if the desert itself was blessing this union of practical hearts who'd found each other through storm and struggle and chosen to stay together for whatever weather might come. Inside the cottage that had become home, Lucy Colter, longer Lucy Barrow, but carrying those memories forward into her new life, settled beside her husband and daughter, finally understanding that some stories end exactly where they were always meant to begin.